They called it the quiet run. No cameras, no headlines, no medals promised. Just a flight plan scribbled in pencil, a cold ocean below, and one rule nobody said out loud. If you go down, you disappear. It's 1943. The war is eating the Atlantic ships' men's secrets. America is in it now fully. Factories roar day and night. Mothers wrap bandages in church basements. Radios hiss with names and places people can't pronounce. And in a small airfield on the American East Coast, where the wind tastes like salt and gasoline, a young pilot named Jack Caldwell is told he's leaving before sunrise. Jack is not the fearless kind you see in posters. He doesn't smile easily. He jokes only when he's nervous, which is often. He keeps a folded photo in his jacket, his younger sister, Maggie, standing in front of a diner sign, laughing like war doesn't exist. Jack's hands tremble a little when he lights a cigarette, not because he's weak, because he understands something most people don't. The ocean is bigger than courage. He's called into a briefing room that smells like coffee burned hours ago. A single light bulb swings slightly, like even the ceiling is tired. At the table is Captain Ruth Morgan, Army Air Forces, sharp eyes, sharper voice. She's the kind of officer who doesn't waste words because words don't stop bullets. Next to her sits a civilian who doesn't introduce himself properly. No rank, no name tag. He's wearing a plain coat like he's trying to blend into the wall. Ruth points to a map. There's a line across the Atlantic, Newfoundland to Iceland to Scotland, a dangerous path, whether that can swallow planes, German U-boats below, long-range fighters sometimes above. Then she taps a small dot marked in red. Your cargo matters more than your aircraft, she says. Jack swallows. What is it? The civilian finally speaks, calm, almost kind. A person. Jack looks at Ruth like he misheard. Ruth doesn't blink. A scientist, British, important. We lost 2 ships trying to move him. We're not losing a third chance. Jack leans back. So VIP transport. The civilian's eyes narrow, but his voice stays smooth. Not a VIP, a target. Jack's stomach tightens. Ruth continues. He's carrying knowledge the Germans would kill for, and if they get him, they don't just get a man, they get time, they get years, they get leverage. Jack wants to ask what kind of knowledge, but he can feel it, the unspoken boundary, the kind that gets you reassigned if you cross it. Ruth slides a folder toward him. Inside is a single photograph. A thin man in a heavy coat, hair combed back too neatly. His eyes are haunted, not afraid exactly. More like someone who has seen the future and didn't like what he saw. Name, Dr. Elias Mercer. Jack reads the next line and feels his mouth go dry. If capture is imminent, do not allow Dr. Mercer to be taken alive. He looks up slowly. Captain, are you telling me? Ruth cuts him off. I'm telling you the mission is bigger than the plane, bigger than you, bigger than me. You protect him. But if the choice is him in Berlin or him in the ocean, you understand. Jack's heart beats hard enough to hurt. He forces a nod, but his face says what his mouth won't. This is not a mission. This is a moral trap. The civilian stands. Your crew. Ruth answers. Navigator Thomas Tommy Reyes, radio operator Eddie Klein, and you. Jack knows Tommy, good with numbers, bad with fear. He prays quietly, even when he says he doesn't. Eddie is younger, quick hands on a radio set, always humming swing tunes like he can charm the war into leaving him alone. Jack signs the papers. His pen scratches like a tiny scream. Then Ruth adds something softer, almost human. Caldwell, you don't have to be fearless. You just have to keep moving. Outside, the air is freezing. The aircraft waits in the dark, a shadow with wings. The engine is covered with a tarp like a body. Jack finds Tommy by the wing, checking instruments with fingers that don't stop moving. Tommy glances up. You look like you swallowed a stone. Jack keeps it simple. We're transporting a man. Tommy snorts. We transport men every day. Jack doesn't answer. Eddie arrives with a thermos of coffee. and a grin that doesn't quite reach his eyes. "Guess what?" Eddie says. "I heard Germans have a new trick, radio direction finding. If they catch our signal, they can guide a wolf pack right to us." Tommy mutters, comforting. Eddie shrugs. "I like honesty, it keeps you alive." They climb aboard. And then Dr. Elias Mercer is brought out. He's escorted by two armed men who look like they haven't slept since Pearl Harbor. Mercer steps into the plane without protest, but his hands are clenched so tight his knuckles are white. Jack introduces himself. "Jack Caldwell, I'll get you there." Mercer studies Jack's face like he's reading something written under the skin. Then Mercer says quietly, "People keep promising that." Jack feels a chill that has nothing to do with the weather. They take off before dawn. The wheels leave the ground and the airfield drops away like a thought you can't hold onto. For the first hour, it's routine. Engines steady, the coastline fades, the Atlantic opens like a mouth. Tommy plots headings. Eddie listens to the radio, turning knobs carefully as if the wrong frequency might summon death. Mercer sits strapped in, silent, too silent. He doesn't look out the window, he doesn't sleep. He just stares forward like he's watching something none of them can see. Jack tries to keep it professional. "What field are you in, doctor?" Mercer blinks as if remembering Jack exists. "Physics." Jack nods, "Must be important." Mercer's mouth twitches, almost a smile but sharper. "It's important the way fire is important," Mercer says. "It can warm your home or burn it down." Jack doesn't like the way that lands. Hours pass. The sky turns a hard gray, clouds thicken. The plane begins to shudder slightly as they hit colder air. Then Eddie stiffens. He points at the radio equipment. "I'm hearing something." Tommy looks up. "What kind of something?" Eddie adjusts the dial, a faint clicking like an insect trapped in glass. Then through the static, 3 short bursts. Eddie's face drains. "That's not ours." Jack's grip tightens on the controls. "Could be civilian." Eddie shakes his head. "No, that pattern German." Tommy whispers, "How do you know?" Eddie swallows. "Because they taught us, so we can recognize it before it recognizes us." Jack's mind races. Over the Atlantic you can't hide, you can only move and hope. He leans forward, radio silence. Eddie hesitates. "If we go silent, we lose navigation updates." Tommy snaps, "If we talk, we die." Eddie cuts the transmitter. The clicking remains, faint and patient. It's like something is listening anyway. The weather worsens. Ice starts to form on the edges of the wings. Jack fights the controls. The plane feels heavier, slower, as if the sky itself is grabbing it. Tommy checks the chart. "We should be approaching the midpoint." Jack glances at the fuel gauge. It's lower than he likes. "Doctor," Jack calls back, "are you comfortable?" Mercer's laugh is short and humorless. No one is comfortable in a coffin that's still flying. Eddie suddenly says, "I'm getting a signal again." Jack's heartbeat spikes. "From who?" Eddie's fingers move fast. "Not sure, it's weak. Could be Iceland relay or someone pretending." Tommy's eyes are wide. "They can do that." Eddie nods. "They can mimic, trick you into revealing position." Jack's mouth goes dry. "Ignore it." But Mercer, who has been silent for hours, speaks up. "Let him listen." Jack twists around. "Excuse me." Mercer's voice is steady. "If they're mimicking a friendly station, the deception will have flaws. Let him listen, not respond. Listening costs nothing." Tommy mutters, "Listening costs hope." Eddie listens. The signal crackles. A voice appears, English, strained, repeating coordinates. "We are down, repeat, down north grid, survivors, freezing." Jack's eyes flick to Tommy. Tommy's expression breaks. "That could be one of ours." Eddie whispers, "It's crying Jack." On the radio, a man's voice is thin, desperate, barely human. "Please, we see lights, we." Then static. Tommy's hands shake. "We can't just." Jack feels his chest tighten. The ocean below is endless. You help one, you might doom all four aboard. He looks back at Mercer, expecting cold logic. Mercer is staring at the floor, jaw clenched like he's holding back something terrible. Jack asks quieter, "Is it real?" Mercer speaks without looking up. "If it's real, they're dead anyway. If it's a trap, we'll join them." Tommy snaps, "That's monstrous." Mercer finally looks at him. His eyes are not cruel, just tired. "What do you think Germany will do with me if they take me?" Mercer asks. "Offer me tea." Silence. Jack makes the call. "Stay on course." Tommy looks like he might cry. Eddie looks like he might vomit. Jack keeps flying because someone has to be the one who decides. Minutes later, the clicking returns, stronger. Eddie's voice tightens. "They're closer." Tommy checks the sky through a small side window. "I can't see anything." Jack scans the clouds. Nothing. Then, like a nightmare emerging from fog, two dark shapes drop out of the gray off their left side. German aircraft. They're not here by accident. Jack feels his entire body go cold. Hold on. He pushes the throttle. The engine roars, protesting. The plane lurches forward. The first burst of gunfire slashes through the air, tracers like glowing stitches sewing the sky. Metal screams, something on the wing sparks. Eddie yells, "They're shooting." Tommy shouts, "No kidding." Jack banks hard, the plane tilting. Gravity presses them into their seats. Mercer grips the straps, face pale but composed. Another burst. The cockpit window cracks, spiderwebbing at the edge. A chunk of something flies past Jack's cheek. Jack tastes blood. Eddie tries to reach the radio. "We need help." Jack roars, "Radio silence was for them, not for us. Call it in." Eddie transmits, voice shaking. "Mayday, mayday, this is." A bullet punches through the radio panel. Sparks explode. Eddie screams and jerks his hand back, blood pouring from his palm. The radio dies in a sizzle. Tommy's voice goes thin. "We're alone." Jack forces the plane lower into the clouds. Visibility drops to near zero. The cockpit becomes a gray tunnel. The German planes follow, shadowing, relentless. Jack's mind flashes to Ruth Morgan's folder, the instruction he wished he hadn't read. "Protect him, but if capture is imminent." He glances back. Mercer meets his eyes, and in that moment Jack realizes Mercer knows. He knows about the line in the file. He knows he is a man being carried with a hidden knife at his throat. Mercer says very softly, "Don't." Jack's throat tightens. "I'm trying." Mercer's voice sharpens. "No, you're trying to save me. If you get the choice, save the world." Jack almost laughs because it's insane. A man asking you to weigh him against everything. The plane takes another hit. The engine coughs. A warning light flashes. Tommy yells, "Fuel line. We're losing pressure." Jack fights panic. He levels the plane, scanning for any break in the cloud. They burst out into clearer air for a moment, and the ocean is right there, dark and indifferent. One German fighter drops behind them, lining up. Jack knows what comes next. A clean burst, engine dead, and then the long fall. He makes a decision that feels like stepping off a cliff. He pulls up sharply, too sharply, forcing the plane to climb into thinner air. The aircraft groans, everyone's stomach lifts. Eddie, clutching his bleeding hand, whimpers. Tommy shouts, "We'll stall." Jack grits his teeth. "Not if I keep her moving." The German fighter follows, but not as easily. Their aircraft is heavier. The climb costs them. Jack uses that moment, banks hard right, then left, sliding into a narrow pocket of cloud and wind. For a few seconds, they lose sight of the enemy. Eddie, face sweating, says, "They'll find us again." Mercer speaks almost to himself, "Unless they think we're dead." Jack's eyes flicker, "Doctor." Mercer looks at him. "You can't outrun them forever, but you can convince them you're gone." Tommy stares, "You want us to crash?" Mercer shakes his head, "Not crash, vanish." Jack understands slowly, dread forming into shape. A controlled descent into cloud. Kill the engine briefly. Let the plane drop like a dying bird. Make the Germans overshoot and assume the ocean took you. It's insane. It might work. It might also kill them. Jack's voice is raw. If I cut the engine, we might not get it back. Mercer nods once. I know. Eddie whispers, Jack. Jack looks at his crew. Tommy pale, Eddie bleeding, Mercer steady like a man already half in the grave. And Jack realizes something ugly. In war, bravery is often just choosing which fear you can live with. He sets his jaw, brace. He pulls the throttle down. The engine noise drops, suddenly quiet, and the silence is terrifying. The plane begins to fall. Tommy screams, Jack. The nose dips, wind howls, the instruments spin. The cloud swallows them. Jack counts in his head, 1, 2, 3. His hands are slick with sweat. If he waits too long, they won't recover. If he starts too soon, the Germans will see. In the falling gray, Eddie prays aloud. Tommy curses. Mercer says nothing. Jack pushes the throttle back up. The engine coughs once. Twice. For a heartbeat, nothing. Jack's stomach turns to ice. Then the engine catches, roaring back like a beast waking up angry. Jack yanks the controls, leveling out. The plane shakes violently but stabilizes. They're alive. Now the question is, did the trick work? They break out of the cloud again. Jack whips his head around. No German planes. Just empty sky and the black ocean below. Tommy laughs, half sob, half disbelief. Eddie collapses back, whispering thanks to God. Jack doesn't celebrate, not yet. Because the war doesn't let you breathe for long. A new problem appears, the fuel gauge, lower, too low. The engine's been hit. They've burned extra climbing and diving. They may not make Scotland. Tommy calculates quickly, voice trembling. At this rate, we'll come up short. Jack's mind races. Iceland. Tommy shakes his head. Too far north now with this wind. Eddie, pale from pain, says, There's a small Allied strip in Greenland. Emergency use. Tommy stares. That's not on our planned route. Eddie winces. Neither was getting shot. Jack makes the turn. Hours pass in a tense quiet. The sky clears slightly. The ocean becomes a hypnotic threat. Mercer finally speaks again, voice softer. Pilot. Jack keeps his eyes forward. Yeah. Mercer says, if we land somewhere isolated, there's a risk. Jack doesn't answer. Mercer continues. There are German agents in places you wouldn't expect. People who sell information for food, for money, for fear. Tommy mutters, thanks for that. Mercer looks at Jack. You read the file. Jack's throat tightens. I did. Mercer nods. If they come, don't hesitate. Jack's voice cracks. Stop talking like that. Mercer's gaze is steady. It's not drama, it's arithmetic. That line sits in the cockpit like a loaded weapon. Eventually, through broken cloud, land appears, ice and rock, harsh and white. Greenland. An emergency airstrip carved out of nothing. Jack lines up the approach. The landing gear groans. The runway is short, rough, and surrounded by snowdrifts like teeth. He brings it down hard but controlled. The plane bounces once, twice, then settles. They roll to a stop. For a moment, nobody speaks. The engine ticks as it cools. Eddie's breathing is ragged. Tommy wipes his face like he can't believe it's still attached. Jack exhales slowly. They made it. But safety is not guaranteed just because the wheels are on the ground. A small group of Allied personnel approaches. 2 soldiers, a mechanic, and 1 officer. The officer wears a heavy coat and an expression that doesn't match the relief you'd expect. Jack steps out first, boots crunching on ice. The cold hits like a slap. The officer calls out in English, "Identify yourselves." Jack gives his name and unit. The officer nods too quickly, like he already knew. Jack's instincts flare. Inside the plane, Mercer is unstrapping. Jack turns back sharply. "Stay seated, Doctor." Mercer pauses, eyes narrowing. Tommy whispers, "Jack." Jack doesn't know what he's seeing, only what he's feeling. A wrongness in the air. The officer comes closer. His men fan slightly to the sides, hands near their weapons. Jack forces his voice steady. "We need medical help and fuel." The officer smiles thinly. "Of course, we'll take the passenger into custody for his protection." Jack's blood runs cold. "His protection," Jack repeats. The officer steps closer, orders. Jack stalls, buying seconds. "From who?" The officer's smile fades. "You ask too many questions for someone who just landed on my strip." Behind him, one of the soldiers shifts, revealing, for just a moment, the edge of a German pistol tucked beneath his coat. It's subtle, but it's there. Jack's mind goes blank and clear at the same time. They didn't escape the war. The war followed them. Jack turns slightly, blocking the plane door with his body. "Doctor stays with us," Jack says. The officer's eyes harden. "Pilot, don't be foolish." Tommy steps beside Jack, hands trembling but clenched. Eddie stays inside, clutching a wrench he grabbed without thinking. Mercer appears in the doorway, calm as death. He looks at Jack and says quietly, "This is the moment." Jack hears Ruth Morgan's voice in his head. "If capture is imminent." Jack's hands feel numb. His mouth is dry. His heart is pounding like it wants out. He looks at Mercer, this haunted man who carries fire in his brain. Then Jack sees Maggie's photo in his memory, a diner sign, a laugh, a world that still deserves to exist after this war. The officer lifts his weapon. Tommy shouts, "Jack." Everything happens fast. Jack grabs Mercer's arm and pulls him back into the plane. Eddie slams the door. Outside, gunfire erupts, bullets hitting metal with sharp, brutal sounds. Jack dives into the cockpit. "Hold on." Tommy scrambles into his seat. Eddie, bleeding again as he moves, yells, "We can't take off, we're half-fueled." Jack roars, "Then we die here." He starts the engine. It coughs, angry, damaged. Outside, the infiltrators shout in German now, no longer pretending. The engine catches. Jack shoves the throttle forward. The plane lurches, rolling down the icy strip as bullets ping off the fuselage. Tommy is yelling headings, even though it's useless. Eddie is praying again, louder. Mercer sits behind them, face pale, eyes closed, like a man listening to a verdict. They reach the end of the runway too quickly. Snow and rocks rush up. Jack pulls back. For a sickening moment, the plane doesn't lift. It feels glued to the earth. Then the wings bite the air. They rise barely, clearing the rocks by what feels like inches. Jack's lungs burn. He didn't realize he'd stopped breathing. They climb into the gray sky again, leaving the fake allies shrinking below like insects. Inside the cockpit, it's chaos and relief tangled together. Tommy is laughing and crying at once. Eddie slumps, pale, whispering, "I'm gonna tell this story in a bar if I live." Jack keeps his eyes forward, voice low. "We're not going back there." Tommy asks, "Where do we go?" Jack stares at the gauges. Fuel is dangerously low. The engine is wounded. The weather is closing. Jack says the only honest thing he can. "We go until we can't." A long silence follows. Then Mercer speaks, almost gentle. "Pilot." Jack answers without looking, "Yeah." Mercer says, "You chose to save me." Jack's jaw tightens. "I chose to keep them from taking you." Mercer nods. "That's still a choice." Jack's hands shake slightly on the controls. He thinks about the radio voice that might have been real, the men in the ocean they left behind. The bullets, the infiltrators, the file. He says, "What are you carrying, Doctor? What is so valuable that everyone keeps dying around you?" Mercer is quiet for a long time. Then he says, a way to make a weapon the world has never seen. Jack's throat tightens, a bigger bomb. Mercer's voice is almost a whisper, a different kind of bomb. Tommy stares straight ahead like he's afraid to turn his head. Eddie murmurs, "Dear God." Mercer continues, "If the Germans build it first, the war won't end with surrender. It will end with extinction." Jack's vision blurs for a second, not from tears, from the sheer weight of it. He had signed up to fly. He hadn't signed up to hold the future in the air with shaking hands. The plane drifts through cloud, each minute borrowed. At last, faint through the haze, a coastline appears, jagged, dark like a promise. Not Scotland, not Iceland. But land. A small Allied outpost, maybe, a chance. Jack brings the plane down again, lower and lower, heart in his throat. They land rough, skidding on wet ground, but they land. This time, when soldiers approach, their uniforms are right, their eyes are tired, and their weapons stay lowered. Jack almost collapses from the relief. They escort Mercer away quickly. Doctors take Eddie. Mechanics swarm the plane. Captain Ruth Morgan's words echo again. "You don't have to be fearless. You just have to keep moving." As Mercer is led away, he turns back once. He looks at Jack, not like a superior, not like a prisoner, but like a man who has been carried through the dark by strangers. Mercer nods. No speech, no dramatic salute, just a nod that says, "I will remember what you did." Jack watches him disappear into a building, and only then does Jack feel the shaking start in his legs. Tommy sits on the ground, staring at his hands. Eddie is carried past on a stretcher, trying to grin through pain. Jack pulls Maggie's photo out of his jacket and holds it like it's real warmth. Somewhere out there, the war continues. Ships sinking, cities burning, names being carved into stone before the men are even cold. But tonight, one plane stayed in the air. One scientist stayed out of enemy hands. And one pilot learned the truth nobody puts on posters. Heroism isn't loud. Sometimes it's just a terrified person doing the next right thing. While the sky tries to kill him. The night before the mission, Jack Caldwell didn't sleep. He lay on the bunk in a barracks that smelled like old wool and fuel, staring at the ceiling while the wind pushed against the windows like a stranger trying the handle. Outside, somewhere beyond the fence, the Atlantic waited. It didn't care about uniforms, it didn't care about prayers, it didn't care about courage, it just swallowed what fell into it. Jack rolled onto his side and pulled a photo from his jacket. A diner, a bright sign. His sister Maggie leaning into the camera like life was simple. He stared at her smile and tried to remember how it felt to be a person instead of a pilot. Then the knock came. Not loud, not urgent, just a firm knock that told you the man on the other side didn't knock twice. Jack sat up, put the photo away, and opened the door. A sergeant stood there with a clipboard and tired eyes. "Caldwell, wheels up at 0430, briefing in 10. Jack nodded as if this was normal, as if men didn't die between a sentence and the next breath. He dressed in silence, his hands moving by habit. Boots, jacket, gloves, the same routine that used to mean training flights and clean landings. Now it meant probability and funerals. The briefing room was dim. A single bulb buzzed overhead. Coffee sat in a metal pot that looked like it had been burned into bitterness. Captain Ruth Morgan waited at the front with a map pinned to the wall. She was in her 30s, maybe younger, but war had done what it does, carved the soft parts into something sharper. There was a civilian beside her. No insignia, no name, just a plain coat and the kind of calm that made Jack uneasy. Ruth didn't waste time. "Lieutenant Caldwell," she said, "this is not a standard transport." Jack took a seat, posture straight. He'd learned that if you looked relaxed in front of officers, they assumed you didn't understand the stakes. Ruth tapped the map with a pencil. "A direct Atlantic run. Newfoundland, Iceland, Scotland. Your weather window is narrow. Your fuel margin is thinner." Jack stared at the line. It looked neat on paper. In the air, it would be cloud, ice, and empty water. Ruth turned her gaze on him. Your cargo is a person. Jack blinked. A VIP. The civilian spoke for the first time, voice smooth and careful. Not a VIP, a target. That word landed heavy. Ruth slid a folder across the table. Inside was a photograph. A thin man in a heavy coat, eyes like he hadn't slept in months. Name, Dr. Elias Mercer. Jack read the line beneath it and felt his throat tighten. If capture is imminent, do not allow Dr. Mercer to be taken alive. Jack looked up slowly. Captain, this is... Ruth cut him off. This is war. The civilian leaned forward slightly. The Germans want him, not because he's famous, because he knows something that could shorten or reshape this war. Jack wanted to ask what Mercer knew, but he could feel the invisible fence around certain information. Cross it and you didn't get answers, you got watched. Ruth continued. Crew is 3, you fly, navigator is Thomas Reyes, radio operator is Eddie Klein. Jack knew Tommy, good man, sharp, the kind who could compute a drift correction with a pencil while his hands shook. Eddie was young, fast with radio gear, always humming swing tunes like he could charm the world into being kind again. Ruth's eyes softened just a fraction. Caldwell, you don't have to be fearless, you just have to keep moving. Jack nodded. His mouth was too dry for words. The airfield before dawn was a place built out of shadow. The plane sat on the tarmac like a dark animal asleep with one eye open. Tommy was already there, checking panels and instruments, fingers working like he could tighten fate into place. He looked up. You look like you're about to confess something. Jack forced a small grin. Maybe after we land. Eddie walked up with a thermos of coffee and a swagger that didn't match the circles under his eyes. Got a rumor, Eddie said. Germans are getting better at finding transmissions, direction finding. If you talk too much, you invite wolves. Tommy muttered, that's cheerful. Eddie shrugged. Cheer doesn't keep you alive. Then Dr. Mercer arrived, escorted by 2 armed men. He didn't resist. He didn't protest. He climbed into the plane like someone walking into a courtroom where the verdict was already decided. Jack introduced himself. Lieutenant Jack Caldwell, I'll get you across. Mercer looked at him carefully, not like a passenger, like a man trying to decide whether the person flying him was capable of something terrible. Mercer said quietly, people keep promising that. Jack felt a chill crawl up his spine. They took off into a sky the color of dirty steel. For the first hour, nothing happened. That was always the lie the war told you first. The coastline slipped away. The Atlantic opened beneath them, black, endless, hungry. Tommy plotted headings, calling them out with a voice that tried to sound steady. Eddie listened to the radio, turning dials with delicate care. Mercer sat strapped in the back, silent, eyes forward. Jack tried conversation, not because he was curious, because silence let your mind invent monsters. What kind of work do you do, Doctor? Jack asked. Mercer blinked. Physics. Jack nodded. Must be important. Mercer's mouth twitched, almost a smile, but there was no warmth in it. Important the way fire is important, Mercer said. It warms your home or burns it down. Tommy glanced back, uneasy. The weather thickened. Clouds swallowed the world. Ice began to form at the edges of the wings like white teeth. Then Eddie stiffened. I'm hearing something, he said. Jack's grip tightened. Our frequency. Eddie adjusted the dial, a faint clicking, a pattern. Tommy frowned. What is that? Eddie swallowed. German, that's German. Jack felt his stomach drop. How do you know? Because they trained us to know, Eddie said, so we can recognize the sound of a trap. Jack leaned forward. Radio silence. Eddie hesitated. If we go silent, we lose relay, weather, navigation. Tommy snapped. If we talk, we die. Eddie cut the transmitter. The clicking stayed, faint and patient, like something listening with its head tilted. Minutes passed. Then the radio came alive again, weak crackling. A voice, English. "We are down, repeat, down North Grid, survivors freezing." Jack's eyes flicked to Tommy. Tommy's face cracked. "That could be hours." Eddie whispered, "He's crying." The voice on the radio sounded like a man at the edge of the world. "Please, we see lights, we." Static swallowed him. Tommy turned to Jack, desperate. "We can't just ignore that." Jack felt the war tighten around his ribs. You turn aside, you burn fuel, you break route, you become predictable. Predictable meant dead. He looked back at Mercer, expecting cold logic. Mercer stared at the floor, jaw clenched. Jack asked, "Is it real?" Mercer didn't look up. "If it's real, they're dead anyway. If it's a trap, we'll join them." Tommy flinched like he'd been slapped. "That's monstrous." Mercer finally raised his eyes. They weren't cruel, just exhausted. "What do you think Germany will do to me if they take me?" Mercer asked. "Offer me tea." Silence filled the cockpit. Jack made the call. His voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. "Stay on course." Tommy stared out the window like he couldn't bear to look at any of them. Eddie's fingers hovered over the radio, helpless. The clicking returned, stronger. "They're closer," Eddie said. Tommy checked the sky. "I don't see." They broke through a thinner patch of cloud, and the German fighters appeared like dark thoughts becoming real. Two of them slicing through gray air with brutal precision. Jack's mouth went dry. "Hold on." He pushed the throttle. The engine roared. The plane surged forward. The first burst of gunfire cracked through the sky. Metal screamed. Sparks flashed on the wing. Eddie shouted, "They're firing." Tommy yelled, "No kidding." Jack banked hard. The plane tilted violently, gravity pressing them down. A tracer streaked past the cockpit window, and the glass spiderwebbed. Jack tasted blood. He didn't know if it was his. Eddie grabbed for the radio. "We need help." Jack barked, "Call it in." Eddie transmitted, voice shaking. "Mayday, mayday, this is." A bullet punched into the radio panel. Sparks exploded. Eddie screamed, yanking his hand back, blood spilling between his fingers. The radio died in a sizzling hiss. Tommy's voice went thin. "We're alone." Jack dropped into the cloud again, using the weather like camouflage. Visibility collapsed into gray nothingness. The German fighters stayed close, shadows circling, patient, professional. Jack glanced back and met Mercer's eyes. Mercer knew. He knew about the line in the file. He knew the plane was a coffin with a condition. Mercer said almost gently, "Don't." Jack's voice cracked. "I'm trying." Mercer leaned forward slightly. "If you get the choice, save the world." The engine took another hit. It coughed. A warning light blinked. Tommy shouted, fuel pressure dropping. Jack's mind snapped into brutal clarity. They couldn't keep running, not forever. The Germans would herd them until the ocean finished the job. Then Mercer spoke again, calm like a man describing weather. "You can't outrun them," Mercer said, "but you can convince them you're gone." Tommy stared. "You want us to crash?" Mercer shook his head. "Vanish." Jack understood, dread turning into a plan. A controlled drop into cloud. Engine throttled down. Let the plane fall like it's dying so the fighters overshoot and assume the sea took them. It was insane. It might work. Jack stared at the gauges. His hands were sweating inside his gloves. "If I cut the engine," Jack said, "it might not restart." Mercer nodded once. "I know." Eddie, pale and shaking, whispered, "Jack." Jack's heart pounded like a fist against a door. He thought of Maggie, of factories back home, of people who didn't know the shape of the war yet only its shadow. Then he set his jaw. "Brace." He pulled the throttle back. The engine noise fell away and the sudden quiet was horrifying. The plane began to drop. Tommy shouted, "Jack." The nose dipped. Wind screamed, instruments jittered, clouds swallowed them again. Eddie prayed out loud, voice breaking. Jack counted in his head, 1, 2, 3. He waited long enough to make it believable, but not long enough to make it fatal. Then he slammed the throttle forward. The engine coughed. Once, twice. For a sick heartbeat, nothing. Jack's blood turned to ice. Then the engine caught with a roar, as if angry to be asked back. Jack yanked the plane level. They burst out of the cloud. Jack snapped his head around. Empty sky. No German fighters. Tommy let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. Eddie sagged back, whispering thanks to God. Jack didn't relax, not yet. Because now the fuel gauge was a new enemy. Tommy did the math with shaking hands. At this burn rate, he said, voice thin, we won't reach Scotland. Jack's mind raced. Iceland. Tommy shook his head. Too far now with the wind and damage. Eddie swallowed. There's a Greenland strip, emergency use, not guaranteed, but it's land. Jack turned the plane north. Hours passed in grim silence. The sky stayed cold and heavy. The ocean rolled beneath them like a dark, patient animal. Mercer spoke quietly. If we land isolated, they may still come. Tommy muttered, because why would the war give us one good thing? Mercer's voice sharpened slightly. There are agents everywhere, people who sell information for money, for food, for fear. Jack didn't answer. He didn't need more fear. Finally, land appeared, ice and rock, Greenland. The strip was crude and short, a scar cut into white wilderness. Jack brought the plane down hard, bouncing once before it settled. They rolled to a stop. For a moment, nobody spoke. The engine ticked as it cooled. Eddie clutched his injured hand and tried to breathe through pain. Tommy stared straight ahead like he expected the sky to punish them for surviving. Jack opened the door and cold air slammed into him. A group approached, 2 soldiers, a mechanic, and an officer in a heavy coat. Jack started to feel relief. Then he saw the officer's face. It wasn't relief, it wasn't surprise, it was readiness. The officer shouted, "Identify yourselves." Jack gave name and unit. The officer nodded too quickly, like he already knew. Jack's instincts flared like a match in darkness. "We need fuel and medical," Jack said. The officer stepped closer. "Of course, we will take the passenger into custody for his protection." Jack's blood turned cold. The words were wrong, the tone was wrong. "For his protection," Jack repeated. The officer's mouth tightened. "Orders." Jack stalled, buying seconds. "From who?" The officer's eyes narrowed. "You ask too many questions for a man who just landed on my strip." One soldier shifted his coat. Jack caught it, the unmistakable outline of a German pistol. The mask slipped for half a second, and that half second was enough. Jack moved fast, stepping to block the aircraft door. "The doctor stays with us," Jack said. The officer's voice turned flat. "Pilot, don't be foolish." Tommy stepped beside Jack. His hands trembled, but he didn't move away. Eddie stayed in the doorway, holding a wrench, face pale but stubborn. Mercer appeared behind them, calm as death. He looked at Jack and said quietly, "This is the moment." Jack's mouth went dry. He remembered the file. If capture is imminent. The officer raised his weapon. Tommy shouted, "Jack." Jack made his choice. He grabbed Mercer's arm and yanked him back into the plane. Eddie slammed the door. Gunfire erupted. Bullets hammered the fuselage with metallic shrieks. Jack dove into the cockpit. "Hold on." Tommy strapped in, eyes wide with terror. Eddie stumbled in, bleeding again. "We can't take off," Eddie yelled. "We're half-fueled." Jack roared, "Then we die here." He started the engine. It coughed like a wounded animal. Outside, the men shouted in German now, no more pretending. The engine caught. Jack shoved the throttle forward. The plane lurched down the icy strip as bullets pinged off metal. They were running out of runway too fast. Snow and rocks rushed toward them. Jack pulled back hard. For a horrifying moment, the plane didn't lift. Then the wings caught the air. They rose, barely clearing the rocks by inches. Jack didn't realize he'd been holding his breath until his lungs burned. They climbed into gray sky again. Tommy laughed and sobbed at once, like his body couldn't choose one survival response. Eddie slumped, whispering, "If I live, I'm never leaving Kansas." Jack stared at the gauges. Fuel was nearly gone. The engine was damaged. But they were alive. Tommy asked, voice small, "Where do we go now?" Jack answered honestly, "We go until we can't." Silence. Then Mercer spoke, "Pilot." Jack kept his eyes forward. "Yeah." Mercer said, "You chose to save me." Jack's jaw tightened. "I chose to keep them from taking you." Mercer nodded. "That's still a choice." Jack finally asked the question that had been burning like acid in his throat. "What are you carrying, Doctor? What do you know that's worth all this?" Mercer was quiet a long time. Then he said, "A way to build a weapon the world has never seen." Tommy froze. Eddie whispered, "Dear God." Mercer continued, voice low, "If Germany gets it first, the war won't end with surrender. It will end with extinction." Jack felt his vision blur, not from tears but from shock. The sky suddenly seemed too small to hold what Mercer had just said. Ahead, through the thinning cloud, a rough coastline appeared, dark land, a chance. An Allied outpost, a miracle or another trap. Jack lowered the plane carefully, listening to every tremor in the engine like it was speaking a language of failure. The landing was brutal, but it held. They rolled to a stop. This time, soldiers approached with the right uniforms, the right tired faces, and weapons kept low. Real allies. Jack's knees almost gave out. Mercer was escorted away immediately, wrapped in secrecy like a shroud. As he walked, Mercer turned once and looked back at Jack. No speech, no salute. Just a nod. A small, grave nod that said, "I will carry what you did with me." Jack stood by the battered plane, wind cutting through his clothes, and realized something that scared him more than the German fighters. He was still alive, and now he had to live with every choice he made up there in the clouds. He reached into his jacket and touched Maggie's photo. Somewhere far away, people were sleeping under warm blankets, believing the world was stable. Jack looked up at the gray sky and thought, the world is stable only because some men keep it from tipping. And sometimes they do it with shaking hands.